Alright, so if you're getting into filmmaking and cinematography, there's only two brands that you should care about in terms of what camera you should buy. No, not those two, because you probably need to rob a bank, but Sony versus Canon. Now, these two brands seem to have been in a turf war for the last couple of years, vying for people's money, attention, in order for filmmakers and content creators to buy their products. But like Josh Brolin with a God complex, switching to Sony, I think, is inevitable. And in today's video, we're gonna go over why switching to this system of cameras is something that you're probably eventually gonna end up doing. Also, I'm gonna say this is just an opinion. A lot of people have a lot of emotional feelings about what camera brand they choose, and this video is just my thoughts about the Sony system versus others that I've used before. But you're probably still gonna come for me in the comments anyway, so we're just gonna go ahead and get through this. Now, I wanted to keep this to full frame cameras that do video, but I wanna say that Sony has a camera for just about everything. It feels like they have no chill in terms of releasing camera bodies. They have the Sony FX6, the Sony FX3, and the Sony a7S III that not only use the same sensor, but they use the same memory card systems, and they also have very similar features to each other. If you want to step yourself up, you can go to the FX9. And if you want to use any of the crop sensor or point and shoot cameras, a lot of them have similar features from picture profiles and even resolution setting. What I also like about Sony is that they have different classifications for different user needs. So if you want to go to somewhere like photography, you can use a Sony a7R series. If you're a sports shooter, you can go and pick up an A9. And if you're somebody that might have run into the lottery or you just robbed a bank, you can go and pick up the A1. It kind of feels like when you ask, hey Sony, what cameras do you make? The only answer they have is yes. What I will say about the Sony ecosystem is that a lot of the features are pretty universal. Now, there is this thing around the camera space when we talk about different features called the cripple hammer. And basically what that is that camera brands will withhold certain features going from different camera bodies to make sure that if you want to go and buy that, you have to go and spend the extra money. Now, that isn't saying that Sony isn't perfect, and I hear you guys. You want focus breathing compensation on the FX3 and a7S III, and I'm sorry. I will say, if you guys are asking for false color on a little screen like the Sony a7S III or the FX3, you have it hooked up to monitors anyway, so you may as well just use the false color that's on there, and that's not a gigantic issue. And neither is shutter angle, because if you're somebody that could afford buying a camera that expensive, you probably know the 180-degree shutter rule anyways. Next is going to be the variable frame rates that are on these cameras. Even going back to the Sony a6300 that I used quite a long time ago, I was able to use 120 frames a second, which is really cool as a feature if you want to get into higher frame rate and slow motion. Now, that only got upgraded as you go to different Sony cameras. Almost all of the new Sony cameras can use 120 frames a second, and a lot of them can use it in 4K. And on top of that, the Sony a7S III, the FX3, and the FX6 can use 240 frames a second at 1080p. Now, admittedly, I have no idea why you would actually need this feature. I've actually not used it more than twice, but it is there, and if you do have uses for it, it's available to you. So if you don't know about this feature on pretty much every Sony camera, it's gonna be its low light capability, and the fact that functionally these Sony cameras have night vision. Now, from using an array of the different Sony cameras, I will say that the low light and the high ISO capabilities on this system is incredibly good. Now, I'm somebody that works on anywhere between small commercial setups and interviews, but one of the things that I really appreciate in terms of low light performance is when I'm running gun shooting or shooting some documentary work. I don't have control of lighting, especially when you're moving around quite a bit, and it becomes a little bit tedious when you're using something like the Canon system, and once you pump up that ISO, your image gets a little bit noisy. In fact, the thing that prompted me from selling my C70 over going to the FX3 last year was I was on a shoot and I had to go up to 6400 ISO in order to get a low light scenario filmed. But what ended up happening is when I got the footage back, it was entirely noisy, and when I sent it back to the editor, the only thing that they said was, "This is okay." Which actually probably means this was trash. So I decided to switch back into the Sony system of cameras because I knew it had great low light performance across the board, whether I'm using the Sony FX3, the FX6, or even using the Sony a7S III and beyond. Another thing that I like about the new generation of Sony cameras is that you only have to use one lens mount, because none of you use the A-mount system anymore. And if you're gonna jump in the comment section and tell me that you still use a Sony A-mount camera for filmmaking and cinematography, go and upgrade, because you're a little bit behind the times. There, I said it. But what I like about the Sony line of cameras is that you only have to deal with the E-mount style of lenses. Now you can go ahead and use the APS-C lenses on a full frame camera, not recommended, and you don't have to worry about things like adapters in order to use different lenses that are in the Sony ecosystem. And over on the Canon system of things, you have more mounts than Goku has forms from Dragon Ball Z. Now currently right now, everything seems to be going all in on the RF mount. EF mount lenses are great and they're functional, they still have great quality, but unfortunately Canon's just not making them anymore. And they can go to the EFS brand of things, but I'm not sure if they actually even work on full frame Canon cameras. And then if you're part of the unfortunate minority, you can go to the EOS M mount, where I don't even know if they make lenses for them past the first 3 or 4 that came out. Which means that if you bought a Canon camera in the last 4 years, there was 4 different lens mounts that you have to pay attention to in order to get them working on your camera. And that the Sony system allows for third-party options, so no matter what your budget is, you could probably find a brand that makes Sony E-mount glass for your camera. Now that includes things like Tamron and Sigma and Viltrox even, that's come out with new lenses in different budget ranges, so you can get the focal lengths that you want no matter what price point that you're at. Now unfortunately, Canon wants to keep everything close to the vest. In fact, Viltrox actually made some RF lenses that are in the budget cinema range. Basically, they told Viltrox to kick rocks, so they actually can't make RF mount lenses for their system. Right now, Canon's kind of moving like a Game of Thrones character in terms of how they're doing their lenses. Keeping everything in the family. Gross. That was disgusting. Why'd I say that? Now, no tech company is entirely perfect, and they're not the greatest at listening to their consumers, but I will say is, generally speaking, Sony seems to do a better job of doing that. When we hated the Sony menu system, they added a new menu system in the new line of cameras. When we didn't like using 8-bit codecs with S-Log footage, they gave us 10-bit in all the new cameras. And when we were sick and tired of terrible colors coming out of their cameras, well, they added a new color science that's making it a lot easier to use. Now, some people might still complain that you can't get filmic colors out of the Sony FX line or any of the new Sony line of cameras, but honestly, I think if you can't get a great looking image out of the new Sony cameras that have come out, that's more so a you problem. And it's also right about the time where people are gonna come for me down in the comment section, and I'm willing to take it. And lastly, and the reason why it's gonna be inevitable that you're probably gonna switch to Sony anyways, is because all the cool kids are doing it. No, seriously. Now, I don't know what marketing juju that Sony had done in the last 10 years. Actually, we know what it is. It's called YouTube. But most people own Sony cameras nowadays. This ecosystem has become so accessible for a lot of people, which actually entices a lot of people to buy. It really went all in on the mirrorless system of cameras in order to capture photography and in video, which meant that it was readily accessible and easy to use for a lot of newcomers coming into making content, and particularly making video. Now, for me personally, I work as a filmmaker and a creator here in the city, and being able to find things like rentals or second shooters or even a camera body that I need to rent for a project, it's a lot easier to do that on the Sony system than it is on the Canon system. And this isn't coming from a biased opinion. In fact, I actually owned the Canon R5 C200 and the C70 just last year. And because of some of the things I didn't like in terms of some of the features that they withheld from different camera bodies, I ended up switching to Sony, and not only did it become easier for me to rent different equipment and be able to use multiple cameras on a shoot, I was able to get a lot of features between the different cameras that I didn't feel like were being held back from me because they wanted me to buy the next expensive thing. Now, that's not to say don't buy a Canon camera. There's different strokes for different folks, and you're gonna buy the tool that's gonna be made for the job that you need. But in terms of video, you're likely going to run into a Sony camera somewhere in your career, and the way that things are moving, it might entice you to switch. Now leave a comment down below, what camera are you currently using? Are you somebody that recently switched over the Sony system like I did, or do you use a different camera and you want to come for me in the comment section, because most people have this emotional connection to what camera they're using for their content. But we'll see how that goes. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.